topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I am a core alignment coach, which means I support people in aligning their choices and actions with their values. And I'm a diversity educator. If you're interested in seeing any programs, sample classes that I teach and offer online and on location, if arranged, you can find my website called knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. And you can find a way to get in touch with me through the website. I have a very fun guest tonight. I'm so excited to talk to another radio host, Andy Jones. He's many more things than just a radio host. And I want to read a little bit. And Andy, feel free to join me as I read a short bio about you. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you.
So Andy Jones, Dr. Andy Jones, has taught for the English department and the university writing program at the University of California, Davis since 1990. Originally trained as a poet and interpreter of poetry, Andy has taught classes on TS Eliot, literature and jazz, and the Advanced Poetry Writing Workshop. As a lecturer in the university writing program, Andy enjoys teaching pre-professional writing classes, such as in-person essay writing, writing in fine arts, and journalism. The author of 4 books and a weekly column for the Davis Enterprise newspaper. Andy also hosts a KDVS public affairs radio show associated with the university and the Poetry Night reading series. Andy was named Educator of the Year by the Associated Students of UC Davis in 2006. You've been the host for over 24 years on the radio, and I love the name of your show, Dr. Andy's Poetry and Technology Hour. And you didn't mention that you've been the Poet Laureate twice for Davis.
That's true. In 2014 and 2016, I was the Poet Laureate of the City of Davis. Thank you for having me on the show.
You're welcome. There's a little other piece I want to read about you that names the books you've authored, but I just want to ask you, there's so many things that I think we get to touch on tonight, and but I want to hear more about your radio show. Let's start there. Like, what's it about? Who's it for? And like, what do you enjoy most about it?
Well, Dr. Andy's Poetry and Technology Hour existed at the start to bring together 2 of my interests. One would be the literary arts. That's my PhD is in poetry. I've earned 3 degrees in poetry now, and I'm really interested in poetry as a means of uplift, of connection of communities, of people to discover more about themselves, of the joy and beauty of well-chosen words brought together. But also I'm interested in technology. And as the show started in 2000, it was kind of the emerging technology of the World Wide Web and of the excitement about the new .com era. Of course, the .com bust occurred, soon after my radio show started, but that did not diminish my enthusiasm for technology. And in the beginning, it was websites and then teaching with technology. And then, of course, these days in 2024, I talk to guests who are experts about artificial intelligence and algorithms and the way that AI is changing our world. But behind that, poetry and technology, they're an unexpected yoking together of very different fields. And so the show is meant to be about the unexpected, about surprise, about convergent and divergent thinking, exploding the different sort of categories that we expect of people. And that's something I've done with my public affairs show and interview show for the last 24 years now.
Wow. And do you have a particular audience in mind when you host the show?
Yeah, I'd say there are a number of overlapping audiences. One would be people who are interested in KDVS, the campus and community radio station. And studies have shown recently that there's been a kind of flattening of taste through algorithms whereby on Spotify or Apple Music or Amazon Music, the algorithms will determine what sort of music we like and then give us only music that's within that narrow range. And which is unfortunate because many of us find that we're kind of pigeonholed into particular genres of music. Well, at KDVS, it's a free-form radio station that is not corporate controlled, so much so that there is a prohibition against playing music that has pretty much ever been in the top 40, which means, for example, that you can't play any Elvis or Beatles because almost all of the songs of those performers have been in the top 40. But for instance, one year, for an entire year, I was able to play bumper music for my poetry and technology program that only came from North Africa. And I did so choosing a different North African performer or CD for each of the 52 weeks of my radio show, because that's what a large and diverse library of music we have there at KDVS. We have the second largest record collection west of the Mississippi River in terms of LPs. And this means that people who are interested in music that is not corporate driven can turn to KDVS and find things that they're not going to hear anywhere else. So I certainly enjoy appealing to that particular audience. Another audience would be that of the poetry community of the Sacramento Valley, of which Davis would be a part. We have the Sacramento Poetry Center, the Sacramento Poetry Alliance. We have a very strong poetry community in Modesto and a growing one in Lodi. These are all places that KDVS can reach. It can also reach the East Bay. But as a former Davis Poet Laureate, I'm especially interested in growing that enthusiasm and that community for poetry in the area. And then the third audience that I think about now that my show is a podcast would be people who would be interested in the quirky, offbeat, but sometimes very well-known poets and authors who have appeared on my radio show and who might encounter that show by searching for Dr. Andy's Poetry and Technology Hour wherever you get your podcasts, as I say on the air. And so, and that is a larger audience, one that sometimes overlaps with the other two. In fact, just yesterday, I was out walking with my son, Juki, and we stopped by Logos Books in Davis. And as I was purchasing 2 plays, a book of poetry and a book of Greek myths for Juki, I was recognized because of my voice by the person who was working at the bookstore. And so I'm not quite sure who my audience is, but it was definitely that guy who's listened to my show and recognize me from my voice. So that happens rarely, but it's certainly a treasure when it does.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad your show is now available on podcasts because interestingly, my show and your show airs on the same day of the week at the
Right.
same hour every week.
So we can listen to each other's work asynchronously.
Yes. And I'm grateful to our engineer, Rebel, who made this time to pre-record so that we can play this on Wednesday
Absolutely.
when you'll be on the air with your show.
Yeah, and I'm very lucky, I should add, to have undergraduates who were my interns and my producers for that radio show. I do all of the engineering and the phone screening of my show in real time myself. So it's just me in the studio. But I do hire, so these are paid interns, undergraduates every year who I teach what we do. And then these are the folks who book guests for me, record the show, engage with guests, send them forms to fill out so that I have a script ready to go. And then also who record the show and upload the podcast as well as writing the show notes. So as you and Rebel know very well, it's a lot of work to put on a program like this. And I'm lucky to have a number of undergraduates who I teach about radio and media production while paying them to help keep the show on the air.
I'm really glad you have the help, and I'm really grateful for my help.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, there's so many. I'm just trying to decide which direction do I want to go next because there are so many things I want to talk to you about. One thing I'm just curious, like, when did you know you were a poet? And I think it takes courage, right, to be an artist and to say, this is what I am, and this is what I do, and this is how I need to express myself, and this is what I'm going to do, because of all kinds of societal pressures of like that do not support art and
Right.
art forms. So can you tell me how young you were when you just knew that you were a poet and how your poetry began to evolve?
Absolutely. I was very young. I should say that when I was a kindergartner, my mother was a children's librarian. And then my father was then a theater director, and before long, a theater and film critic, where I grew up in Washington, D.C. So I was steeped in the arts, right? We would go to museums on the mall on weekends, and I would go to story time before I could even follow the story at local public libraries. And I would go to films that I didn't always understand and which frankly were not always appropriate for me when I was just a little boy, because I would go to films and plays with my father. I also attended a Waldorf school. And as you may know, Waldorf believes in an unhurried child who is steeped in the arts and a sense of awe and wonder about the world. And so this idea of committing to the arts or discovering poetry, I feel like I was immersed in these things that I never had to discover them because they were always about me. And that gave me a certain kind of confidence when it came to the arts. There's creativity is so important. There's a story that comes to mind. It's probably an apocryphal story about a 6-year-old girl who is drawing a picture with crayons. And her teacher says, Susie always seems to be the name in these stories. Susie, what are you drawing there? And she said, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher said, nobody knows what God looks like. And then Susie said, well, if they hold on a minute, they'll know in a minute. So the story is that sometimes we are inborn, I feel, with creativity, and that we gradually learn to become embarrassed about it or to feel alienated from our own creative spirit. I don't know that I was ever such an alienated person, that I was always dabbling in different creative arts. And I think that that came to a head with my peer group as an undergraduate, that I had a friend who would recite TS Eliot lines whenever we walked past the Eliot Hotel on Boylston Street in Boston. And I thought, well, I was made to memorize poems as a child, but how delightful to have them to keep you company as an adult, as much as a college student is an adult. And so I too would memorize poems, start to write poems, go to poetry readings at Harvard University, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I found what amazing professors we had at Boston University, such as future Nobel laureate Derek Walcott, future US poet laureate Robert Pinsky. These are people who I got to teach with. Future professor of poetry at Oxford, Sir Christopher Ricks. These were my mentors and people who wrote letters of recommendation for me to get into graduate school. So I felt that I was very lucky and really well supported by educational mentors and inspirations all through my educational trajectory.
Oh, that is fantastic. I'm very happy for you.
I was very lucky.
Well, before I turn to your books, would this be a good time for you to read one of your poems for us?
Sure. I've brought two of my books of poetry. One is called Where's Juki? I co-wrote this with my wife, Kate, and it's about raising a son with special needs. And one is called In the Almond Orchard, Coming Home from War. And this is a book that is about the experiences of veterans living in Yolo County. And so one book comes out of my experiences, and one book required significant research because I have not served in the military. But they're both books that are close to my heart. And I thought that I would share a book, or excuse me, share a poem first from my first book called Where's Juki? This one is called My Entropy Elephant. And it's about the sort of chaos that my son Juki brought with him wherever he went when he was a little guy. My Entropy Elephant. He is my entropy elephant, my kangaroo of chaos. The contents of all drawers will be revealed. All shirts become t-shirts, all gowns strapless. If a tree falls in the forest, run to take the axe from his hands. If the water main has broken, then he has taken a break. Water seeks its own level, and this boy is a guide. Left-handed people are sinister and clumsy, they say, but our little lefty hoorays the lightning strike, the wind shear. We get no rest from this tempest. The nanny cries. It's not their stuff, so the neighbors just sit back and watch, thinking with that arm he could pitch for the giants. I never knew that pliers could be used in that way. We can find no matches for his socks, his shoes, his mittens. He plays with matches. How will we ever find him a match?
Oh, wow.
So, and Juki is my constant. He's 23 now. Obviously, he was not 23 when I wrote that poem, but he's my constant walking companion. He is nonverbal, and as a result, he does not complain. So when I took him for a long walk yesterday, I got to let him choose where we would go. And he kept walking us farther and farther away from home. We live in kind of Southeast Davis. We made it all the way to Northwest Davis. And then by the time we came back, I don't know if you can see that, we walked 14 miles. So
Wow.
I'm very lucky to get to spend so much time with Juki, and that he's patient with my proclivity for cruelly long walks.
Well, that's what one thing I really respect about you and your wife, though I have not met her yet. That's awesome that she co-wrote that book with you, but that you're so clearly a dedicated family member, a dedicated father, and that's always a wonderful thing for the whole community and the world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Would
Well,
say the name of that book again. That you
it's
you and
it's Where's Juki? And
okay.
Juki is my son's nickname. He was born with the name Jackson. His big sister named him Juki when we brought him home from the hospital, and that pretty much sticks. And then the Where's Juki, it has several meanings that you can anticipate. One is like whenever it's quiet, we needed to know where our son Juki was, because as that first poem suggests, he was causing trouble somewhere, doing damage to something in our house, and we needed to know where he was. But the other element of Where's Juki is suggested by the last line of that poem, how will we find him a match? And that is, if you've got a young man who's growing into adulthood, but who does not have the benefit of language, there is, we understand what he's thinking to a certain extent through intuition and through him grabbing one of us by the wrist and leading us to something. And so we ask this question, the existential question, like, where is Juki? And most of us can say, I'm here, but he cannot. And so we ask these questions about what is he thinking about? What's going on inside that head of his? And that's largely what we explore with this book of my wife's essays and my poems.
That is beautiful. And what a deeply compassionate question to frame for your son. And
Absolutely.
yeah. Wow, thank you. Did you want to read another poem from the other book, or do you
Sure.
want
So this book is called In the Almond Orchard, Coming Home from War. And I was commissioned by the YOLO Arts Council to write a single poem that could be presented at a special event honoring veterans of YOLO County. And as I mentioned before, I myself have not served in the armed service. And so I wrote poem after poem after poem, trying to get at what might be said to show respect for the military, but also in my own way to kind of question the need for the wars, as well as the defense budget that we have found ourselves in as a nation. But I wanted to do all this in a way that was highly respectful of the individuals who have sacrificed so much for our country. And so I wrote, there's an old saying by Elizabeth Bishop. She said, sometimes the best way to revise a poem is to write another poem. That we have to abandon something, no matter how well-intentioned, learn from it, grow from it, and then move on to the next project. And that's how I approached finding this one poem that I wanted to write, is to write poem after poem after poem, trying to get at it. And then finally, my editor said, we almost have enough for a book here. And so I turned to not only to the Yolo County Arts Council and the California Arts Council, but I turned to our then state senator, Lois Wolk, and said, I wonder if your office would like to support the printing costs of this project. And very kindly, they did. And so I had enough to publish a book that I could then give out to veterans at Veterans Day events and Memorial Day events, where I performed poems from this book all through the years that I was poet laureate. So it was very rewarding work. And I thought I would read the title poem, which is called In the Almond Orchard. In the Almond Orchard. Once in my fatigued and sweltering imagination, I straddled two continents like the ancient colossus of Rhodes, a foot in a punishing wasteland, a foot on our California farm. In battle dress, I sweated, surrounded by enemies in an unforgiving panorama of sand, my finger resting on the trigger. I recalled my high school buddies, the foot soldiers of my childhood, talking fantasy football in pickup trucks and laughing irresponsibly in the pizzeria. I would not break. Bleak, scorched, emptied, I resolved to return. Back in California, the two people I have been are becoming one again. The preacher tells me that I knew both cavalry and Calvary, that I had known the Savior's anguish in the place of the skull. Now, sinking into a porch-mounted glider, we watch the forsythia bushes and the American cars rumbling past beneath unremarkable streetlights. We pass the summer, the temperature's hot but tolerable. Drip irrigation soothes the languid air, the infrequent drops teasing the thirsty almond trees. Stooped with age, the orchard hand, our guide, scans the splitting hulls for orange worm and peach twig borers, ravening insurgents that menace his precious crop. A handheld bug zapper hangs from his belt. He points out the bud's thick and leathery coat, and then the peach pit's reticulated shell, hard and sharp to touch. So many layers to reach the tasty droop, the kernel deep inside. Soon the shakers come and drop the stone fruits to the ground. I watch immigrant laborers examining buds and branches in the afternoon sun. No one here has concealed explosives. No one threatens to riot. No nihilists in secret vests eye me suspiciously. Standing at attention for so long has worn me out. I look hopefully to the sky through almond branches, rich with gifts. Tiptoeing out upon the crunchy hulls, we thank our guide, accept our parting gift, make our way to the truck, and pull away. Returning home, I pull my pickup off the road and walk deep into my grandfather's cornfield, as I did as a boy, the boy who dreamed of becoming the man who comes home from war.
Wow.
And that was In the Almond Orchard, the title poem from my book, In the Almond Orchard, Coming Home from War.
Very powerful. I'm so glad you shared how the challenge of honoring individuals and with the conflicting feelings about, do we need to go to war?
Right.
And how long do we make our boys/men and now women suffer and sacrifice? That is quite a challenge.
Absolutely. There were some poems that I could read at the events that I attended and some that I could not. There was a short one called The Bullet Tree, which I think reflects my own attitudes. But many times I would keep these attitudes to myself. Let me see if I can find that one on page 81 here. You know you've accomplished something when your books are so long you can't even find your own poems. But this is just a short one. I thought I'd share it with you to give you a sense. It's called The Bullet Tree. A morning misting of gunpowder descends upon this tree my father planted. It has no needles or leaves, this bullet tree. Young men walk beneath the branches, catching an occasional gleam, asking, which bullet is for me? High up, I see ornamental sashes, giant wreaths with irregular branches, bandoliers stocked and heavy with their sharp fruits. I carry my father's helmet upside down like a bowl, gathering different caliber bullets, stepping carefully through the casings. And of course, that's meant to reflect living in a country that seems to be obsessed with guns and obsessed with bullets.
Wow, that's so that strikes me so deeply. I don't dare try to find words for how the impact of them. It does make me want to share, though, that every year we do a show honoring veterans, which is always so moving, and we connect veterans with resources through the show notes and through banners to help prevent suicide and connect them to resources because of all the trauma so many come home with.
Right.
So we and I know in our last show, I think we had 3 different veterans guests, some returning because they're just so amazingly able to verbalize things. The show kind of ended with all 3 veterans saying no one wants peace more than a soldier.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Thank
I
you so
certainly
much.
explore that, and the sort of anguish that they feel for what they've seen, as well as like what they're commanded to do or to not do. You know, when they're sent to some of the most difficult, obviously most contentious parts of our globe. And there are ways that they can do good, but there are ways that the challenges are too great for them to take on. And I'm sure that I'm not sure. I get the sense that every soldier who goes off to such a place of extreme conflict comes home partly with the mind of a social worker, thinking, how could I have done more for my fellow humans?
I hear that sense.
Yeah.
I get that sense. This is maybe a good segue to one thing I asked you in advance, if I could, because of your experience as a radio host and your experience as a poet laureate, which I mean, I should have asked you at the beginning to define, like, what's the responsibility of a poet laureate, but I know it includes, like, the other Davis poet laureate I know, Julia Levine. You both do things that really help the community, with artistic expression
Right.
and empower people, the healing power of art, whether it's writing or reading or acting or singing, or just knowing you 2 examples of poet laureates. I just really appreciate how much you continue to bring to the community. And before I ask my question about specifically about like responsibility and standards of what the question is, to share with the audience, of speaking our own bias and our own truth when we are hosting a show. That's the question I'm leading to. But what can you say a little bit more about what is expected of poet laureate and why you were chosen for one? Because you're probably doing what they expect of a poet laureate.
Right. Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned Julia Levine. I strongly encourage listeners and viewers of your show to check out her work and read her books. She's an amazingly talented poet, and she gives really heartfelt readings as well. I don't know if you saw the poem that she read at the recent Martin Luther King Day ceremony here in the city of Davis, but I was really moved by that. And I think, as you alluded to, that's something that Julia did very well, and that I was called to do in somewhat less tumultuous times for our city, with fewer tragedies, during my 2 terms as poet laureate. And that is to give some sort of voice to a community that is grieving, or that is trying to make sense of something that transcends our ability to understand. And this is often when we turn to a poet or a poet laureate and we ask, try to approximate the jumble of feelings that we are coping with as a community, or give us some wisdom. You know, there are times when we turn to presidents, legislators, city council members, and many of them do excellent work of leading, of moving the country or the city in a particular direction, representing constituencies to get things done, to improve our lives in material ways. But a poet, W.H. Auden once said, poetry makes nothing happen. And in many ways, that's true, that we don't turn to a poem for a solution to a problem. We turn to a poem so that the poet can offer a clearer sense of what we're feeling, so that by communicating a succession of emotions, we can almost reenact the perspective, the emotional and lived empirical perspective of all of us who are grappling with something difficult. And so I think that this is one job of the poet laureate. I know, for instance, that then Mayor Gloria Partida contacted me to let me know that there would be an event at the Carousel in Central Park and Farmers Market Park here in the city of Davis, to recognize and mourn the lives of a great number of people who had been killed at a nightclub in Florida. And it was like an evolving, emerging tragedy that we were coming to grips with as a country. And it was also interpreted as an act of homophobia, that a gay nightclub was a place where so many people were killed by someone with an assault weapon. And so, I was poet laureate. I got the message, I think via Facebook message in the morning. And then just like a few hours later, there I was writing, reading an original poem that I had written in between the time that I got the message and the time that I biked over to Farmers Market Park. And so, not to toot my own horn, but there are many cities, sadly, that don't have a poet laureate, and that we call upon our city leaders to voice the concerns that we have. I know that former Mayor Rob Davis, who may be the most eloquent person in the city of Davis, that he spoke so movingly, but his job was not to pair beautiful or moving words together with images in an arc with a beginning and a middle and an end in the way that a poem does. And so, like, for instance, that was my job. And so that's what I presented. And
Thank you.
with that particular poem, as is often the case, when I got home, I said, this could use a little work. And I did some work on it and some more work. And then I said, well, this could also almost be an essay, So I turned it into an opinion piece, and I sent it off to the Sacramento Bee. And then an editor got back to me just as I was about to go to bed around 1 a.m. that night, saying, yes, we'll take this piece, we'll run it in the newspaper tomorrow. And so it was just like a surreal experience as a writer for me, that I got my assignment from a mayor in the morning. I performed it that afternoon and then transformed it into an essay, which would appear in the Sacramento Bee the next day. And so I think of that as an example of a time when I was serving the community as poet laureate. But what's written into the job description, and I know this because I co-wrote the job description, it feels like almost 20 years ago now, when we were proposing the poet laureate position, and I can offer you some background on that if you're curious, is basically to increase the appreciation of poetry in the community of Davis, and to commemorate with what are called occasional poems different events in the city of Davis. And typically we want that to be the christening of a new city building, or the elevation of a new mayor, for example, rather than mourning of a local or national tragedy. But there's been a mix of those different responsibilities for different poets laureate, including myself. And I feel that because there are only 5 of us, they should all be named. They include Allegra Silberstein first, Eve West Bessier second, I was third, James Lee Job fourth, and then Julie Levine, who's doing such a good job as poet laureate now, and who's actually been recognized by the National Poetry Society, if I remember correctly, with a grant because of the good work that she's done as poet laureate of Davis currently.
Well, thank you. Boy, I asked the right person for a description of what is expected of poet laureates, at least in the city of Davis. Because I think, because of my experience with both of you, I think you play a healing role, and that's what I really appreciate. And I know Juliet's been on my show a couple of times for her Hope River project, Hope in the Time of Dread, a powerful project she brought to at least one school, and had all the students writing poems turn into a beautiful book. It's just incredible. And there's much more to say about it, but people could go find that show. It's called Hope River, Hope in the Time of Dread, about climate change and how young people are feeling about climate change. And
those young poets also performed at the John Etzoulas Gallery as part of my poetry series. So that was a lot of fun too.
Yeah, you got to see them. Yeah, well, gosh, I can't believe it. So we have only 5 minutes left, and I want to let's at least touch on my burning question. And I have to say, I got to hear the first few minutes of your most recent show, up to the point where you read the Leonard Cohen poem called Democracy, and which I recommend people listen to. It was just a great poem and great timing, because I this question came with the opportunity to speak to you about what is, I don't want to say right or wrong, but what's the best way to use my platform is to provide a venue where marginalized voices, ideas, people can speak, and just be broadcast all over the place, all over the world, voices that need to be front and center and still are not mainstreamed, and who are brilliant, incredible thought leaders. So knowing that that's the purpose, I'm very much a listener, an observer, and an interviewer. And but I find right now, we have 4 minutes left, I'm very concerned about our democracy in this country. And I know that, I've, like a lot of Americans, experience division and divisiveness, and people I know and love dearly having what feels like polar opposite points of view than I do. So I'm very it's so important to me to connect with people with different points of view, right? That's so that I can live within my values, to just remember everybody was born loving. We are, we believe what we're exposed to, what we hear repeatedly, depends on our experiences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I know that I just feel like I've been too silent, actually, rather than someone I feel like, oh, I say my opinion too much. I think, in fact, my self-critique is that I really feel like, since we're in election year in the United States for the top level U.S. president, which influences not just our people, but the whole world, I feel like I need to be responsible and share more about how and why how and why it is we are actually in danger of losing our democracy. So I know we have no time to talk about that topic, but I just want to give you a couple minutes to respond to the idea of sharing our bias on the show when we think it's in the best interest of the most people, and also then you'll just have another minute for your closing thoughts.
Right. Well, I think that you and your show perform a very important service by elevating diverse and underrepresented voices. And it seems to me that this is one of the ways. I mean, it's in some ways it's analogous to what I do with poetry. I would say, this important element of American culture is underrepresented and underappreciated. And I will offer excellent examples over and over again so that people have that opportunity. And I'd say that you do something very similar, but more meaningful during this time of political, not only political conflict, but political danger with the political hazards that we're facing right now. And that is elevating voices that need to be heard so that people can tell their stories and voice their concerns. Let those stories elevate the stakes so that people understand, that democracy really is on the ballot, as you said before, and to reflect what your ethical beliefs are with the recognition that they are widely shared. And that is, democracy depends upon the airing of multiple voices, and to keep the established power structure from diminishing or silencing voices that have been historically underrepresented. And to my mind, that would be people of color and indigenous voices and the LGBTQIA community, et cetera. And to let people know what's at stake. I'd say that there's also a clearly anti-democratic authoritarian bent in one of our political parties. And insofar as we're a country that depends upon an interaction of ideas of those two parties, then to move towards authoritarianism, a move towards what would accurately be called fascism, that this is deeply troubling and that more people need to hear that. I think as hosts, we often do that by introducing our listeners and viewers to great guests, but we also ask questions that that may shape the conversation to elevate these voices and those concerns. I feel that my listeners don't always need to hear me say those things. I and my listeners are often more interested in hearing my guests express those concerns. But I can ask the questions that will lead people in that direction, which I think is fruitful and also necessary for a healthy democracy. So that's how I think about it.
Thank you. What a great answer. I'm going to go back and listen to this. I really appreciate it. And you just have, I only need 30 seconds at the end to thank everyone. So you have a minute and a half to share your closing thoughts for the show today.
Yeah, well, my closing thoughts would be, shows like this one deserve your support. Artistic communities in Davis and wherever you're listening, they deserve your support. And I'd also like to invite people to come sample that with the work that I do. I host poetry readings every first and third Thursday at the John Netzoulis Gallery. You can find out more at poetryindavis.com, and I invite everyone to come check it out. There's always an open mic, so we too get to hear a variety of voices at the Poetry Night Reading Series.
Fantastic. I'm so glad you announce that invitation. Dr. Andy Jones, it's been an honor to have you on here. I so appreciate your sharing your poetry, your books, a piece of your story, and that we can go out and to watch these poetry readings.
Thank you so much, Bahia. It's been my pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure. And I love to thank our producer, Dean Piper, and our engineer, Rebel, for all the help and support, and all the listeners and viewers who keep watching and listening and encouraging us to have more and more dialogues. And may we all have enriching conversations and diversity this week.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate